Well, I noticed that I have a mixed audience here. I've got students from the school, and then I've got the rest of you. So now my challenge is, who do I speak to? Well, you might say, what do you mean, who would you speak to? Just speak to all of us. But are there two different languages then? One for the students in school, and one for those who have finished with school. I don't know. You have to make up your mind, but I think what I'm going to try, since I have this opportunity of having a captive audience of students, is that I'll talk to you guys, okay? The students. Because if you think about it, if I talk to the students, everybody will understand. If I talk to everybody, the students may not. You know, the two languages are different. So I think it'll be a safer off with the students. All right, so here's the story then. It's called, as you can see, it's called From the Hole in the Wall to the School in the Cloud. So I have to explain both of those terms as we go along. I'll take you back first to almost 14, 15 years ago, India in 1999. So personal computers were just about becoming popular. They were very expensive. People would buy them. Sometimes they would even buy them for their homes, but they were meant to do work on, you know, to do your own office work and things like that. And they were expensive, so people normally would not give them to children at all, except for a few people who had lots of money, and they would give it to the children. And in those days, a lot of parents used to say to me that, you know, my child must be gifted. So I would say, why? What happened? So she would say, you know, the other day I was you know, looking for a file on my computer and I couldn't find it, and my little girl came and she just found it, you know, very quickly. So she must be gifted. So I noticed this sudden increase in the number of gifted children, and decided that. And I also noticed that the gifted children were usually children of rich parents. So I said, this is a weird, you know, a weird part of human evolution, that rich people's children are becoming gifted. So I decided to give computers to some really poor children just to see what happens. So what about those ungifted children? I mean, what are they going to do with a computer? They're just going to stare at it and scratch their heads. So I put a computer, a pretty good quality PC in those days, 15 years ago, into a wall in a slum, like an ATM, you know, like a do-it-yourself ATM. And it was running Windows, it had the internet on it, it had a touchpad, no keyboard, and I just turned it on. It was 3 feet off the ground, so the children came running in there and said, "What's this?" So I said, "I don't know." Okay. And so they said, "Can we touch it?" I said, "Well, it's on your side of the wall, so you can do what you like with it." And I went away. I went away because if I had, you know, sort of stood there, then children would not have done very much. They would have just also stood there. But as soon as I went away, they obviously all jumped onto the machine. They had not seen a computer before. They didn't know what the internet was. So what would they do? Well, about 5 or 6 hours later, one of my colleagues came rushing into my office and said, "You know what? Those kids outside, they're surfing. And they're teaching each other how to surf." So I said, "But that's absurd. They've never seen a computer before, and most importantly, they don't know any English, so what are they looking at? How are they going from one place to another?" We had no answers, but they were surfing, and they were downloading games in a couple of days. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. They went to, I don't know how they found it, but they went to Disney.com, and they downloaded some free games from there, which had Mickey Mouse in it. And when I went, I used to occasionally go there just to, what I would do is I wouldn't go there like a teacher or anything. I would just walk over there and I'd say, hey guys, so what's happening? Anything interesting? And they would say, yes, we found the rat game. I said, poor Mickey. Called a rat. But anyhow, at this point in time, the World Bank noticed all this. And the newspapers had begun writing about it in India, and what they were writing was, they were saying, we don't know how this has happened, but these slum children in Delhi, they seem very functionally okay with the computer, and they even seem to know what they're doing. We don't know how this has happened, but the person who has done this, and they named me, claims that they learned all this by themselves. It was considered absurd. The World Bank gave me some money to say, please find out properly whether this actually happens everywhere. Or has somebody just come by and shown them how to use the mouse? So I went on a 5-year experiment. I took 17 different villages and slum areas in India, all up and down the country. If you can imagine the map of India, it's kind of like a quadrilateral. You've got the Himalayas up in the top, you've got the ocean, the Indian Ocean at the bottom. And in between is, well, just about everything. Okay, so you have all kinds of people, you have all kinds of places, you have hot places, cold places, deserts, mountains, rivers. A bit like the United States, it's a pot boiler, as they call it. So I chose these 17 places carefully so that they were very different from each other, put the computers in there, and studied it for about a year, just to see what would happen. So here's a little 3-minute film which will take you on a tour of rural India.
Each Havartian gets 5 goodies, and there's nothing left over. Great thinking!
पहिल्यापासून इकडून सुरुवात करायची आणि जी आपल्याला दिसेल
আজ ভোমর ভোলে মধু খেতে ঘুরে বেড়ায় আলোয় মেতে
What you saw there starts up in the north, a latitude just a little bit above the latitude you're in, Houston. Okay, a few more degrees up. And it goes down all the way through to the equator, below Mexico. That's the spread that you saw, and I think you must have noticed how the faces of the people change, the languages change, the music changes. But not the behavior of children. It remained absolutely constant. That's good news for all of us, isn't it? So I measured. What did I measure? What I did was, I would go to each of these places and take a sample of about 20 children at random, whoever was there. And we had a test. The test measured how good you are at doing everyday tasks on a computer. And I would apply that test, and then we would go back month after month and retest. This is what we got. So I'm not going to go into the details of all this, but just to tell you what this graph is trying to tell us. Okay, what it says is groups of children left unsupervised with an internet connection in any culture in a 9-month period will reach the same level of competence as the average office secretary in the West. So I published that. And as you might imagine, it raised a lot of questions about training. The role of training. I mean, how was this happening? They were just teaching themselves. But there it was. The numbers were there to tell us that it was indeed happening. So there was a lot of interest. What were they doing? You know, what would happen to these computers? Well, my purpose was to see if children left alone with the computer, what would they do? My purpose was not of how long would the computers last. But as it turned out in the open like that, the computers lasted for about a year and a half. And after that, they were not there anymore. Or they were broken, or not working, and so on. Is that a problem with children? No, I don't think so. It's a problem with technology and society. There was nobody there to keep it going. And these computers, they don't survive out in the open. If I take this computer, put it out on the street, how long do you think it will last? Okay? And not because of children, I can assure you. So that's a different problem. That has nothing to do with the hole in the wall. So in that year and a half, what did they do? So we know that firstly, they learned to use the internet by themselves. And then, they started playing games. Okay, and they played games and more games and more games, and after a while they got a little tired of the games. They started looking for other things, one of the most popular being paint. And they would start making pictures and, painting stuff and things like that. They would listen to music, they would do videos. The local people watched all this, including teachers, and said, well, so what? I mean, they're playing games and they're doing all sorts of things with the computer, but have they actually understood anything at all? I'll tell you a little example. In one village, a little boy complained to me, and he said, this paint, I make such lovely pictures, but then they're all gone after that. When I close it, it's gone. So, I just lose the painting. It's not like paper. So I said, well, what do you want me to do? So he said, isn't there a way to keep the paintings so that they don't go away? And I'll give you one guess what I said. I have no idea. Now, why would I say that? There was a reason why I was doing this, why I was, saying I don't know anything. Because if children all over the planet, if 2 billion children have to learn all of these things, there never will be enough teachers everywhere. There never will be a person everywhere who will say, this is how a computer works. So I wanted a method which will work without me. I was looking for it at that time. Well, anyway, in that village where the paintings were getting lost, I went back in a few days later, and the same fellow, the little boy, was there, and with a big grin on his face, and he says, my paintings don't go away anymore. So I said, how's that? So he said, there are little boxes inside this machine, and you can keep the painting in the box. And if you remember the name of the box, you can open it again. So, to use a Texan term, I said to myself, holy tamale. So the thing is, had he learned or not? Of course he learned. He had not learned it in the way in which, he didn't know what a file or a folder was. He called them boxes, so what? But he knew where they were, how to look for them, and so on. Then, in a Delhi slum, the school teacher said, something very funny is happening with the children. So I said, what? She said, they have changed. I said, well, what have they done now? I said, the quality of their homework has changed completely. They are reporting, they're doing some really deep work. And their English is absolutely perfect. So I went to investigate. How can this happen from a hole-in-the-wall computer? Well, they'd actually discovered a search engine and they were typing their homework into it. And the search engine was producing page after page of stuff and they were copying that down and taking it back to school. So 8-year-olds were quoting from the Harvard Business Review. So I thought to myself, my God, what have I done? This is not education. Is it education? Well, I'll get the answer almost 7 years later from Gateshead, England. But that's the rest of my story. Anyhow, the point is, the first thing I noticed in that work that those guys were submitting, the copied stuff, there was something really odd about it. They were copying the right things. So I said, well, that's not so easy. The internet is throwing everything it has at them. The internet doesn't know that they're children. They're reading all this stuff. They're reading research papers and they're reading the Harvard Business Review. But they're not just copying it blindly. Some are, but many times they're not. How are they making any sense out of this? I had no idea, but I had the sneaky feeling that what had happened at the hole in the wall was that they had learned how to learn. And I wanted desperately to find out how that works. So I started looking at what was happening at these hole-in-the-wall computers after that initial phase. And I noticed firstly that their computing skills would go up steadily until a point where they would actually pass a government examination in computer science, junior level, just about pass it, but that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, they just pass it with nothing, with no instruction. we found that their mathematics scores were going up for no reason at all, because they weren't doing math on the machine. But the scores were going up. Maybe it had something to do with this constant seeking and constant evaluation of information. What's right, what's wrong, and so on. I don't know why, but it did. Their English pronunciation was changing because they were listening to English off the internet. Some of it was a Southern American drawl, but other than that, it was all right. So, by and large, it was a mixture of different kinds of accents, but it was understandable English, and it had happened out of nowhere. So at this point, I went to England. I went to England, to Newcastle University. Newcastle is a little town, kind of halfway, if you imagine the map of the UK, it's kind of halfway between London, which is at the bottom, and Aberdeen, which is right up at the top, and Newcastle somewhere in the center. Aberdeen's in Scotland, and they pronounce it Aberdeen. The reason why they say Aberdeen and not Aberdeen is because if they open their mouths to say Aberdeen, their lungs will freeze. Anyhow, so the question in England that people asked me was, there has to be a limit. It's not that children can just learn anything at all. How is that possible? There has to be some limit. There has to be a point at which children will say, we can't learn this. This is too hard. So I decided to test it. I went to a village in India and I downloaded some stuff off the internet. It was about how the DNA molecule, genetics, how the DNA molecule reproduces itself. All undergraduate, first year, second year stuff. What they teach you in the second year of college. I downloaded that into a computer, a hole-in-the-wall computer in a little village in southern India, where the language spoken is a language called Tamil. And there were 12-year-old, 13-year-old children there. So they all know me. So they came running in, they said, is it a new game? So I said, no, it's not a new game, but it's some really interesting stuff. But I'm afraid it's all in English. And, you guys don't know any English, and this is way above. This is taught in college. This is meant for older people, so you're never going to understand this, okay? If you say that to 12-year-olds, things happen. So I went away from that village, leaving that stuff there. I had pre-tested the children, which was a cruel thing to do because they all got a 0. I mean, naturally, how would they know anything about this? I came back after a couple of months and the children were looking very quiet and very grim, So I said, hey, what happened to you guys? So they said, we've understood nothing. So I said, oh, well, never mind. I mean, it's very difficult stuff, I told you. So when did you give up? So they said, no, we haven't given up. What do you mean give up? We look at it every day. So I said, you don't understand these screens, you don't understand anything on this, and for 2 months you've been just staring at it every day. Whatever for? So then one little girl, whom I will remember all my life, she raised her hand and she said, in broken Tamil and English, she said, but apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else. So there you go, I mean, we have a few 12-year-olds here, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. We think they're idiots, they're not. All right. So I pre and post tested them. But that's Kuppam. That's the village. They had gone from 0 to 30% in 2 months. Kind of a statistical 0 to 30% in 2 months. Now that's not supposed to happen at all. I mean, what's all these universities and schools for then? If this is going to happen under a tree in the village of Kuppam in an unknown language 10 years ahead of their time. But 30% is still pretty sad, isn't it? I mean, it's not a good score. Can we get them 20 more marks somehow? So I found a young girl, she was about 22 years old, and she was a great friend of the children. They used to play together. So I asked this girl, she was an accountant. I asked her, can you teach them more biotechnology? And she said, absolutely not. She said, I had no science in school. I don't understand computers. I don't have any idea of what they're doing under that tree with all those big equations and drawings and so on. I can't help you. So I said to her, no, you use the method of the grandmother. So she said, what's that? So I said, you stand behind them, and whenever they do anything, you just say, wow, that's cool. How did you do that? That's fantastic. Where did you get that thing from? You know, when I was your age, I was so stupid I couldn't have done anything like that. I mean, all of you have grannies. You know how that works, isn't it? So grandparents use a different method from either parents or teachers. Okay? I asked Rekha, this girl, to use that method. She used it for 2 months and the scores jumped to 50%. Just because the children wanted to show Rekha that they can. So I thought, well, this is really good. This is for free. This is really difficult learning happening out of nowhere for free. When I looked at that graph, I realized that there must be something we haven't understood about how children learn. We think we have a method. The method is that I will go into class, you'll sit down in front of me, I will tell you some things that I know. I will say, did you listen to me carefully? Then I'll say, well, whether you listen to me carefully or not, here's an exam. And then I'll say, to the ones that passed, I'll say, you're good boys and good girls. And to the ones who fail, I'll say, you're bad boys and bad girls. That's our way. It's been around like that for 300 years. But is it the only way? This experiment seemed to suggest that it isn't, that there could be other ways. I decided to find out. I went back to England with these results and started going to schools in northeastern England. It's a relatively poorer part of England, and I'm quite good friends with many of the teachers there. I used to go to their schools, and we decided to try the hole in the wall. But you can't do the hole in the wall experiment in England. You know why? Because you'll get frozen children. English weather. You can't have them standing outdoors and down. All right, so what I had to do was, in England, I turned the hole in the wall inside out. I took it into the classroom. So what do you do inside a classroom? Very simple. I'll tell you what they did in China, in a place where I explained to the principal what this is all about. Well, he removed all the furniture from the classroom, he shut down all the computers, even though everybody had a computer. He shut them all down except for about 4. So there are 20 children and there are 4 computers. And those computers are kept on the floor, and he filled up the whole classroom with pillows and blankets and cushions and that kind of stuff. And then we asked the children a pretty difficult question, which I'll tell you in a moment. But anyway, so we asked them that, and the children said, we don't know the answer. So I said, well, there's the internet. So they said, but there are only 5. So I said, yeah, I can't help that. So what happens when you have 20 children and 5 computers? They crowd around it like the hole in the wall. And like the hole in the wall, they jump 20 years ahead. So we called this a self-organized learning environment, or a SOLE, S-O-L-E. So what do you do in a SOLE? Well, reduce the number of computers so that you have to work in groups. Working in groups is very important. Okay? None of what you saw in the hole in the wall ever happened with a single child. Never, ever. It always works in groups. So you have a few computers, you have lots of children, and you have to have a nice big question. Okay. More about that in a moment. But first, let's take a look at some souls.
And Sugata's new teaching methods have now also arrived on these shores. The lessons learned from his very first experiment in India with hole-in-the-wall computers are now being applied to schools in Gateshead.
Stephen?
Bonjour.
Bonjour,
So the
good.
process is that you take a group of children, you ask them to make groups of 4. Each group of 4 is allowed to use one computer with an internet connection. And then you trigger off the system with a question. That question is absolutely critical.
What I want you to find out for me today is, where does language come from? I don't know the answer.
Where are you going to start looking?
Scott, you put it on tight. Some scientists say that language is the very thing that makes filming. It says on here, Connor, where did you just there? Waiting the big one. Where does language come from?
What website's this?
Yeah.
Wiki Answers? Would it not be easier if the teacher just told you where language came from?
No, because then we won't really be learning anything for ourselves. Like when you get a hard question and if like you find it out, it makes you feel much older.
Do you? That's what you feel about 9.5?
Yes.
What does that
mean?
And Scott, that's a lot of stuff. I wouldn't have been able to get this much in such a short time. Really?
Experts who study language know that there is no simple answer that explains what words came from.
So now we know that kind of free method will get you up to 30%, that we know from Coupon. How do you get the additional 20? I needed some grandmothers. So I put out an appeal in the Guardian newspaper in the UK saying, if you are a British grandmother, if you have broadband and a web camera, can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? In 2 weeks, I got 200. I know more British grandmothers than anyone else. Lovely ladies. So, actually, I'm joking. They're not all grandmothers. There are men and women. There are young men, young women. It's a cloud of people who are interested in children, and all I'm asking for is an hour a week. And what do? I beam them. I beam them into any school I want, or any school that wants them. And they go in there and they talk and they do their thing. I don't give them any instructions at all. I just say, you go there, you do your thing. Here's an example.
You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Well done, very good.
So a couple of years passed and the teachers started talking to each other and saying, this is really, really cool. I mean, you whatever you wanted to teach, you convert that into a question, start a soul, walk around once in a while and just see what they're doing, but don't interfere, and your work just gets done. So a lot of people started asking, does that mean you don't need them anymore? You don't need the teachers anymore? That was wrong. That's entirely wrong. You need someone to set the question. The teacher's job changes dramatically from giving the answer to making up the question. And let me tell you, that's harder than giving the answer. So anyway, something else started happening. People from all sorts of areas other than education started to say that they've used these results to do things. Well, here's an example first. The guy who wrote the book, which became the film Slumdog, Millionaire, said, I've watched the hole in the wall experiment and I got inspired to write this book. I was quite stunned. Till today I don't quite see the connection, but anyway, he did get inspired, so good for him. A teacher in Mexico that I haven't met even till today took his school from being one of the worst schools in Mexico in mathematics to being one of the best. And when asked how he did it, he said, there's a gentleman called Sugata Mitra in India. I've read about what he does, and I used his methods. I don't know what he did, but this is what Wired magazine reported, and there's a girl there, that girl standing with her hand on her face. She's a prodigy. She's sort of way ahead of the pack. He discovered her, but presumably using self-organized learning methods. Recently, India, Sri Lanka won now you guys won't know this, there's something called a one-day international cricket championship, okay? And Sri Lanka won it. And everybody said, Sri Lanka, how did they learn? Who taught them? Who were the coaches? And Mike Atherton, the English cricket captain from many years ago, he wrote this article, and I was stunned. I opened the page and the first line had my name on it. I said, what have I got to do with cricket? I've never touched a bat in my life. So he said, you see, when children learn by themselves, they invent new ways. And if you look at the way those bowlers in Sri Lanka were bowling, they couldn't have been taught by an expert coach because they had invented methods that we've never seen before. And that can only happen if they're self-taught. And he quoted the hole-in-the-wall experiment.
Yes, he's my cousin. Yeah, he's my cousin.
Here's a typical soul in England.
Name was Paul Cezanne. Cezanne was his second name and Paul was his first name. He was French. He was born in 1839 and he died in 1906.
El mundo se va a terminar porque el mundo va a girar muy rápido y va a haber destrozos naturales.
So how does all this work? Okay, now the fun and games are now over, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to do some hard mathematics. I have been trying to battle with this whole thing about how does it work? We know what happens. We know fantastic things happen, but how does it work? I have a suspicion, and I'm going to show you 3 slides full of words, so you don't have to read everything, but I'll explain to you where I suspect this is coming from. It's coming from a subject which is understood by physicists and mathematicians as the theory of chaos. Okay? What it says is that there are things called self-organizing systems. And there is a thing called emergence, which is very interesting. I'll tell you about it in a moment. And there is an even more interesting thing called the edge of chaos. Your learner today, in this ocean of information that we have, it's no longer like the 19th century where you had this flat pond, which was knowledge. You, the teacher, understood everything about it. The students sat on the banks of that sea pool of knowledge and you just taught them. It isn't like that. Your student today on the internet is like that guy on his surfboard. Okay? The last thing he wants is a teacher on his back telling him what to do. Okay? Because he'll sink if you do that. The teacher has to be on the bank, just telling him the general principles and then saying, go. So a self-organizing system is a, don't read all that, okay, that's all hard stuff. It just says that if you connect things together, then the whole system starts to behave in a certain way. Imagine a pendulum, it swings from side to side. Imagine 2 of them, both swinging from side to side. Now imagine a string which connects the 2 of them, and suddenly you find you get chaos. Okay? Imagine a million pendulums all connected to each other. You've got something similar to the internet. Self-organizing systems have this funny property that nice things happen. You know, there are some places which are really boring and nothing changes, and some places which are totally random, where, you know, nothing interesting happens, random things happen. Where the 2 things meet, that's called the edge of chaos. And really interesting things happen over there, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Okay, that's what that big paragraph is trying to say. This phenomenon is called emergence, and it always looks very peculiar because you say, well, I didn't do anything. There was this bit of dust, and there was a bit of wind, and suddenly a dust devil rose up and started moving around. Who made the dust devil? Nobody did. It just happened. That's called emergence. What I suspect is that when you put learners together, connected to each other because they're allowed to talk, drop them into the internet, learning happens like an emergent phenomenon. And that's why you suddenly say, well, how could 12-year-olds have done this? Because emergence is like that. You cannot tell by looking at the parts what the whole will do. It's a hard subject, we're just beginning. But I think that's what's happening here. So in 2013 I got the TED Prize and I decided that I wanted to study this whole thing a little bit more. I wanted to build 7 laboratories. I built 5 of them. 5 of them will be in India and 2 in the UK. I've built the 2 in the UK and I've built 3 in India now. They will range all the way from children who have absolutely nothing to children who have everything. And we'll study them over a period of 3 years to see if I give the same environment to all of them, do they all progress the same way or do they progress differently? Obviously, I don't have the results right now, but here is what's happening. The remotest of these areas is a village called Korakati. It's on the eastern side of India where the Ganges meets the Indian Ocean, meets the Bay of Bengal actually. And it's full of rivers. It's full of rivers and it has nothing. There's no electricity, there's no healthcare, there are no schools, there's no education. But it does have a couple of things. It has lots of snakes, crocodiles and Bengal tigers. Okay. So, and it has children who treat the Bengal tigers like cats. So into that village, I'm putting in a school in the cloud, which you'll just see. And Killingworth is a part of Newcastle upon Tyne, which has a really lovely school called George Stephenson High School. George Stephenson, the steam engine man, he used to live nearby. So between these two is the range that we're looking at.
What is the future of learning? Could it be that we are heading towards or maybe in a future when knowing is obsolete? Could it be that we don't need to go to school at all? Could it be that at the point in time when you need to know something, you can find out in 2 minutes? My wish is to build a facility where children go on these intellectual adventures, driven by the big questions which their mediators put in. It's a facility which is practically unmanned. It will be called a school in the cloud.
মানুষ করার ইচ্ছা খুব কিন্তু সেরকম ভাবে আমরা পারছি কই এখানে যে স্কুল
Good teachers don't go to remote places. The remoter you get, the worse primary education becomes. I don't know how to build a school in the cloud because I've never built one. So I'm trying to figure out a design which, really speaking, belongs to children and is run by children. So that's what's going on. It's a great big experiment.
Schools as we know them now, they're outdated.
As soon as I started doing it and seeing the buzz and the enjoyment of the kids, it made me look at my lessons differently and the role of a teacher differently, less talking at the front and more handing it over to the children.
I really like it because it's independent and you get to work with your friends.
Korakati may or may not be different from the schools of England. That's what we are going to look for.
The idea is to have a complete glass front to a building here and a large screen for a full-size Skyped-in mediator.
ইন্টারনেট বসানো থাকবে এই লন্ডন থেকে কম্পিউটারের মাধ্যমে এখানে পড়ানো হবে
All I ever really wanted to know about computers was how to turn them off.
Hi! Hello Raveen. Hello Ajay. How nice to see you. Look what I made. Can you see what this is?
সব জায়গায় প্রায় ইংরেজির আমি ছোটবেলা থেকে যদি শিখি তাহলে আমার বড় হলে তখন আরো ভালোভাবে শিখতে পারবো
You help a child to the point where if he wants to know something, he knows where to look for it and how to look for it.
The more affluent children have people who will help them to learn anyway. But it's children in desolate areas who really desperately need to know how to learn. And I know that the internet does that. Learning itself is actually an emergent phenomenon, it's like a hive or like a thunderstorm.
It's not about making learning happen, it's about letting it happen.
Where the jungle was, there's this building now. And inside it looks like that. Okay. It can be done, it's solar powered. It has 8 megabit per second internet. Coming from a 40-foot high tower, you have to raise the receiver up until it can see another tower somewhere far away. The village people took bamboo and raised that receiver until we got the internet, and it was 8 Mbps. That's a lot. There's Killingworth, England, with an identical facility. That's what it looks like. On the right-hand side, there's an Xbox. Wouldn't you like to have an Xbox in the classroom? New Delhi, a town called Newton Aycliffe in England. Chandrakona, another part of Bengal, another facility like that. And there they are, with their grannies, their cloud, their websites, and you know, the biotechnology of DNA, quantum mechanics, whatever you want. Okay? And if you see the faces, I guess I don't really need to say very much more, do I? Thank you.